Right now, millions of Americans are searching online asking the same question. Where's my $2,000 check from Trump? Here's what you actually need to know. No hype. Just the facts that affect your wallet. President Trump has been talking about sending $2,000 dividend checks funded by tariff money. He's mentioned this multiple times since November, calling it a payment for middle and lower income Americans. But here's the reality. This is not a done deal. Congress hasn't approved it, no executive order has made it law, and the Treasury Secretary himself said on national television that he hadn't even discussed the details with the president when the announcement was made. Let's talk numbers. The government has collected about $309 billion in tariff revenue so far. Sounds like a lot, right? But if these checks actually went out to everyone making under $100,000, that would cost at least $300 billion, basically wiping out all the tariff money collected. And that's the conservative estimate. Some budget experts say it could cost up to $600 billion, depending on who qualifies. Now, Social Security, that's a different story. And there are real changes happening right now that you need to know about. Trump signed Executive Order 14,247 back in March that permanently ended paper Social Security checks as of September 30th this year. Over 450,000 Americans who were still getting paper checks had to switch to direct deposit or direct express cards. This change is permanent and it's already in effect. There's also been a major shift in how overpayments work. If Social Security overpaid you, they used to take back 10% of your monthly benefit. Now, for any overpayments discovered after March 27th, 2025, they can withhold 100% of your benefit until it's paid back, unless you negotiate a lower rate or qualify for a waiver. The bottom line? Those $2,000 dividend checks are still just talk. They would need congressional approval, and right now there's no legislation moving forward. What is real are the Social Security changes already in place. In this video, I'm breaking down exactly what's confirmed, what's speculation, and what you should be doing right now to protect your benefits. So let's dive deeper into what's actually happening with these dividend checks, because the confusion out there is absolutely massive. You've got people planning their budgets around money that doesn't exist yet, and that's dangerous. President Trump first floated this idea back in August when he said Americans might receive a portion of the tariff revenue as some kind of rebate. Then, in November, he got more specific on social media, saying there'd be a dividend of at least $2,000 per person, excluding high-income people. Most recently, just a few weeks ago in mid-November, he told reporters in the Oval Office that these checks would probably go out around the middle of next year, maybe a little later than that, and they'd be for people of moderate and middle income. But here's where things get messy. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent appeared on ABC's This Week literally hours after one of Trump's announcements, and he basically threw cold water all over the idea. He said he hadn't even talked to the president about it. Can you imagine? The Treasury Secretary, the guy who would actually have to execute this plan, finding out about it from social media like the rest of us. Bessent then suggested that maybe the $2,000 Trump was talking about wasn't actually a check at all. Maybe it was just the tax savings people would see from Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill legislation that already passed. You know, things like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security benefits. He said the dividend could come in lots of forms. Now think about what that means for a second. If the Treasury Secretary is saying one thing and the president is saying another, that tells you there's no actual plan in place. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt tried to clean this up later, saying the president is committed to making it happen, and his economic advisors are looking into it. But looking into something and actually having legislation ready to go are two completely different things. And here's the kicker that nobody's really talking about enough. Even if Trump wanted to just sign an executive order and send out checks tomorrow, he can't. This would require congressional approval. It would require legislation. You can't just move hundreds of billions of dollars around without Congress saying yes. The Supreme Court is actually hearing arguments right now about whether Trump even had the authority to impose these tariffs in the first place using national emergency powers. If the court rules against him, the whole foundation of this dividend idea collapses. Not only would there be no money for checks, but the administration might actually have to refund billions in tariff money that's already been collected. Trump himself has said that losing this Supreme Court case could cost the country $3 trillion in refunds and lost investment. So we're talking about a situation where the very source of funding for these supposed dividend checks is being challenged in the highest court in the land. Let's talk about the practical math here, because this is where you really see how unrealistic this proposal is. The federal government collected about $195 billion in tariff revenue in fiscal year 2025. That sounds enormous, and it is. But if you're going to send $2,000 checks to every American making under $100,000 a year, you're looking at about 150 million people. Do the multiplication and you get $300 billion right there. That's more than all the tariff money collected. And remember, some of that tariff revenue comes from tariffs that were already in place before Trump took office. It's not all new money from his policies. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget looked at this proposal and estimated that if it were structured like the COVID stimulus checks, where adults and children both qualified, the total cost could hit $600 billion. $600 billion. Where's that money supposed to come from? Trump keeps saying he'll use tariff money to pay down the national debt and send out dividend checks. Well, which is it? You can't do both when you don't have enough money to do either one. It's like someone telling you they're going to buy a house and a boat with $10,000. The math just doesn't work. And here's something else that economists are really concerned about. If these checks did go out, they could actually make inflation worse. Think about what happened during COVID when stimulus checks went out. People got that money, they spent it, demand went up, but supply couldn't keep pace and prices shot through the roof. We're still dealing with those inflation problems today. So the very thing these checks are supposed to help with, the affordability crisis that's crushing American families, could actually get worse if the government floods the economy with another few $100 billion in spending. It's a real catch-22 situation. Now I want to shift gears and talk about the Social Security changes that are absolutely real and already affecting people's lives, because this is where you need to pay close attention. The end of paper checks isn't just some minor administrative change. For about 500,000 Americans who were still receiving paper checks, this was their lifeline. These were predominantly older Americans, many in their 80s and 90s who either didn't have bank accounts or didn't trust electronic systems. Trump signed Executive Order 14247 on March 25th, and it gave everyone until September 30th to make the switch. The Social Security Administration reached out to these folks, gave them options for direct deposit or direct express debit cards, but the transition wasn't smooth for everyone. The reasoning behind ending paper checks actually makes sense on paper, if you'll pardon the pun. The Treasury Department said, processing paper checks cost taxpayers about $657 million in fiscal year 2024. Paper checks are also 16 times more likely to be lost, stolen, or altered compared to electronic payments. They're slower, less secure, and more expensive to process. From an efficiency standpoint, going electronic is the obvious move. But efficiency isn't everything when you're dealing with vulnerable populations who may not have easy access to banking services or who struggle with technology. The really concerning change, though, is what happened with overpayment recovery. This is something that could financially devastate people if they're not prepared. Here's how it works. Sometimes Social Security pays you more than you're actually entitled to receive. This can happen for all sorts of reasons. Maybe you got married and Social Security didn't update its records quickly enough. Maybe your income changed and you forgot to report it, or you reported it, but the agency didn't process the information correctly. Maybe there was just a straight-up error in the system. These overpayments happen to about 2 million Americans, and when Social Security discovers them, they're required by law to get that money back. Under the Biden administration, the recovery rate was set at 10% of your monthly benefit. So if you were getting $2,000 a month and they discovered you'd been overpaid, they'd take $200 out of each check until the overpayment was paid back. That's manageable for most people. You still have $1,800 coming in every month to pay your bills. But on March 27th of this year, the Social Security Administration announced they were jacking that rate up to 100%. 100%. That means if you were overpaid after that date, they could take your entire check until the debt is settled. Now, the agency said this was about being good stewards of taxpayer money, and they pointed out that this was actually the policy during the Obama administration and Trump's first term. They estimated this change would recover about $7 billion over the next decade. But here's the human cost of that decision. Imagine you're 78 years old, living on Social Security, and suddenly you get a letter saying you were overpaid 3 years ago through no fault of your own because of a clerical error. And now, starting next month, you're getting $0. Not a reduced check. Zero. How do you pay rent? How do you buy groceries? How do you afford your medications? For many seniors, Social Security is literally their only source of income. The backlash to the 100% withholding policy was immediate and intense. Congress members, advocacy groups, and seniors themselves flooded the Social Security Administration with complaints. People shared horror stories about facing homelessness, skipping meals, and going without essential medications. And to the agency's credit, they listened. In late April, they revised the policy. Instead of withholding 100%, they dropped it down to 50% for most Title II benefits, which includes retirement, survivors, and disability insurance. Supplemental security income overpayments stayed at the 10% recovery rate. 50% is obviously better than 100%, but it's still a massive hit if you're living paycheck to paycheck, which most Social Security recipients are. Losing half your income for several months or even years while an overpayment gets paid back is financially devastating. And here's what makes this even more frustrating. In many cases, these overpayments aren't the fault of the beneficiary. They're the result of the Social Security Administration not processing information quickly enough or making data entry errors, so you're being penalized sometimes years later for mistakes you didn't make. The good news is that you have options if this happens to you. First, you can request a lower recovery rate. You need to call Social Security at 1-800-772-1213 or visit your local office and explain your financial situation. They can reduce the withholding if you can demonstrate that losing 50% of your benefit would cause serious hardship. Second, you can appeal the overpayment itself. Maybe the amount they say you owe is wrong, or maybe you disagree that you were overpaid at all. You have 90 days from the date on the notice to file an appeal, and the agency won't collect while the appeal is pending. Third, you can request a waiver. If you can show that the overpayment wasn't your fault and that you can't afford to pay it back, Social Security might waive the debt entirely. You have to fill out Form SSA 632BK and provide detailed information about your income and assets, but it's worth doing if you qualify. The problem is that many seniors don't know about these options, or they find the process too complicated and intimidating. The Social Security Administration has been dealing with massive staffing shortages, which means wait times to get someone on the phone or to schedule an office appointment can be hours or even weeks. By the time you actually talk to someone who can help, you might have already missed deadlines or had payments withheld. It's a bureaucratic nightmare at a time when you can least afford it. There's also been a lot of confusion about what these changes mean for people who are already paying back overpayments that happened before March 27th. The good news there is that if you were notified about an overpayment before that date, your repayment terms don't change. You stay at whatever rate was in effect when you got the notice. The new 50% rate only applies to overpayments discovered and notified after the policy went into effect. So if you're already in a repayment plan, you don't need to worry about suddenly having your withholding rate increased. But you should still keep an eye on your statements and make sure everything is correct because mistakes happen all the time in these systems. Now, bringing this back to the dividend checks, I want you to see the contrast here. You've got a proposal for $2,000 checks that would cost hundreds of billions of dollars, has no congressional support, no actual legislation drafted, and might not even be legal given the Supreme Court challenges to the tariffs. Meanwhile, you've got very real Social Security policy changes that are already in effect and directly impacting millions of Americans' ability to pay their bills. And those changes are being made to save $7 billion over 10 years. $7 billion versus potentially $600 billion. Real changes that hurt vulnerable people versus promised checks that may never materialize. That's the reality of what's happening right now. If you're sitting at home wondering whether you should count on that $2,000 check, the answer is absolutely not. Don't make financial plans based on money that doesn't exist. Don't take on debt thinking you'll pay it off when the check arrives. Don't delay necessary purchases or medical care hoping for a windfall. Until there is actual legislation passed by Congress, signed into law, and with checks actively being processed by the Treasury, treat this dividend idea as political talk, not financial reality. What you should be doing instead is protecting yourself from the changes that are real. Make absolutely sure you're set up for electronic payments if you're receiving Social Security. If you don't have a bank account and you're not comfortable with one, look into the Direct Express Card program. It's a prepaid debit card that works just like a checking account for receiving government benefits, and you don't need a bank account to get one. Make sure Social Security has your current contact information and that you're reporting any changes in your circumstances promptly. The sooner they know about changes to your income, marital status, or living situation, the less likely you are to end up with an overpayment situation down the road. If you do get an overpayment notice, don't panic, but don't ignore it either. Read it carefully, understand what they're claiming you owe and why, and immediately start exploring your options for appeal, waiver, or reduced repayment rates. The 90-day window goes by faster than you think, and missing those deadlines can cost you thousands of dollars and months of financial stress. Consider reaching out to a legal aid organization or an elder law attorney if the amount is substantial or if you don't understand the notice. Many of these services are free or low cost for seniors, and keep your eyes open for more changes. The Social Security Administration is under pressure to find cost savings, and we're likely to see more policy shifts in the coming months. There's also ongoing debate about the long-term funding of Social Security itself. The trust funds are projected to run out of money by 2033 if nothing changes, which means benefits could be cut by about 23% across the board unless Congress acts. That's a much bigger threat to your retirement security than any dividend check, real or imagined. The bottom line is this: when it comes to your Social Security benefits and your financial security in retirement, don't get distracted by flashy promises that may never happen. Focus on what's real, what's documented, and what's already affecting you. Stay informed about actual policy changes, know your rights when dealing with the Social Security Administration, and be proactive about protecting your benefits. That's how you navigate this environment successfully, and that's how you make sure you're not caught off guard by changes that could hurt your financial situation. Your retirement security is too important to leave to chance or to base on political promises that might never come through.